David leads a group called the Urban Campus, and all of the Chicago-based higher education entities are a part of Urban Campus. They recently completed a study, and there is a breakout meeting following the last panel today. The summit concludes at 2:30, and then about 2:45, there will be this meeting where David can share some of the information from this report that is just being released to talk about how we may want to scale the information that was obtained in the Chicago area to the mega region, and then of course building off of what we're hearing in Wisconsin coming back. I appreciate that Chancellor Ford did know that the Alliance is the right platform to bring these groups together and these decision makers together. And we are very proud of the very strong support that we have from Indiana University and from Purdue and the University of Illinois, both Chicago and Urbana, and the University of Wisconsin, and just so many schools. In fact, I think we have some of the chancellors that are a part of the Alliance board. If you could please stand, if you're in the room. Chancellor Lowe, Chancellor Keehan, Chancellor Ford. Yep. So again, if you have questions in regard to the work that the Alliance is doing in that space, please be sure to see our board members. And if your schedule allows, please attend this breakout session with David Baker. So next, I'm actually going to be introducing the chairman of the Alliance, who will introduce the next keynote speaker. This is an important conversation because we're all aware that our area is a major hub of manufacturing in the United States. I wanted to briefly, though, again, give my profound thanks to Paul Jones. And again, for those of you that are aware of the history of the Alliance, you'll know that when the Alliance was first formed, we searched for leadership from the private sector. And immediately, Paul Jones stepped up to the plate as one of the real influencers in the Milwaukee area, with relationships in the business community and strong ties with the public sector. Paul has been devoted to this effort. We wouldn't be here today, really, without Paul and what he has brought to the table. So just in the matter of the last few weeks, he's been in China, he's been in Mexico City. He's literally still, as a retired person, as busy as any retired business person can possibly be. And I'm so grateful, Paul, for all that you do for this effort. And I know it's really your real understanding of how important the mission of the Alliance is, and your continued support and the time that you give to this. So can I ask everyone a round of applause for Paul Jones?
Well, I appreciate that, Kelly, but as everybody here, I think, knows, I call her my boss for a good reason. So, and I see Greg nodding his head. We are going to change gears just a little bit, although maybe not as much as I originally thought, because there's a lot going on in global trade policies. You hear the word tariffs a lot more lately. And there's just a lot going on there around the world. And we're very, very lucky to have the CEO of Rexnord Corporation. That's a company that does business around the world, has manufacturing pretty much around the world, involved in a lot of different things. And I think it'll be interesting to hear what our next speaker has to say. The reason I said we're not maybe changing gears quite as much, because one of the things that Rexnord does is one of their divisions is Zurn. And if you know Zurn, they make flush valves for porcelain devices. And Dr. Wu mentioned the phrase taking a leak this morning. So maybe we're a little bit more connected there than we have been before. So Todd, we're going to have to figure out how to put some sort of medical reporting device into our porcelain devices as we go forward. With that being said, and hopefully forgotten, it's now my pleasure to introduce Todd Adams, the CEO of Rexnord. He's been in that role now for 9 years and just doing a terrific job running a global enterprise. Todd?
I wish I would have heard that. Good morning. Well, there were a couple phrases that I wasn't expecting to hear this morning. Must have missed an interesting session. Paul and Kelly asked me to come and talk to this thing, and I said, well, I'm not sure I can add any value. I mean, I looked at the agenda, and I saw just a terrific panel, and obviously Foxconn being sort of the name brand and sort of the hottest thing in town or in the region. And Kelly said, well, just think about it. And I said, well, the thing that I can do is offer a perspective for a company who's been in the region for a long period of time and facing many of the same things that Foxconn is facing here. We face all over the world every day and have for a very long time. And so, this is sort of an alternate perspective of, I think, some of the things that Foxconn is sort of bringing to the table and challenging the region to do, but in reverse. And so we're not unique, but I thought I'd take you through just some of the realities of what it means to operate a global business and some of the complexities that we see and how we work through them. Just give you a 2-second Rexnord commercial. Rexnord today is about, it will be over $2 billion this year, 6,700 employees globally, 1,800 people in the region. So just about 25, or a little bit more than 25% of our employees in the world are in the region. We do business in over 75 countries, and we've been around for 127 years. We operate what we call a diversified industrial. So we have a bunch of different businesses that do different things, but there's a lot of common threads to them. We solve customers' problems. So we have a business that's process and motion control, which is how the business was founded, and basically making mechanical components that go into complex systems that help customers move and produce goods. As Paul mentioned, we thought we needed to diversify our business a little bit because of where the world's water needs were and how water conservation was becoming increasingly important. And 10 years ago, we diversified into a water management business called Zurn, so professional grade plumbing products. The thing that we do really well, right, is we figure out how to create a sustainable competitive advantage and exploit it. So you don't stay in business for 127 years without doing something right and being the best in the world at it. We think we do that. And we do that through something we call the Rexnord Business System, which is sort of a disciplined operating system. It's not a computer system. It's the language we use internally. It's how we talk. It's everything from how we do strategic planning to how we develop people to ultimately how do we make money for our shareholders. So a small business based in Milwaukee its entire life, but it's taken on many forms. The company's been bought and sold in public and private, and most recently we went public in 2012. And so this is a little bit of a case study / story around a regional business that's been able to thrive for a long period of time by adapting. And that's really the emphasis, I think, that I want to sort of give you some perspective on. If you read this and let it soak in for a minute, it doesn't sound like it's possible, right? But it is. And I think rather than take you through a strange example that you wouldn't recognize, I'll take you through something that everyone knows. In 1985, if you wanted to rent a movie, where did you go? Blockbuster. So Blockbuster went public in 1997. Had a terrific run, put stores everywhere, right? Dominated the market. Along came a little company called Netflix, doing very similar things at the time. If you remember, they were the rental guys, right? They saved you a trip. They actually saved you 2 trips. And you didn't get hit with the invariable late fee. Like I was always late, which was a great business model, but tough. What were they both doing? They were delivering entertainment to consumers, right? But in very different ways. Before, you had to go to Blockbuster, pick out a movie, rent it, bring it home, watch it, bring it back, hopefully on time. Netflix, you just picked what you wanted. They sent it to you. You sent it back when you were done. That was it. What happened over the next 10 years is an incredible story, right? Consumers wanted convenience. Netflix figured out the easiest way to ship media to people was the United States Postal Service, right? It saved 2 trips. It was lower cost for the consumer, greater convenience, and started to build a business. And in 2006, Netflix started to get into digital media, right? At the time, 2006, Blockbuster was number 366 on the Fortune 500. By 2011, they were out of business. Netflix shipped 13 billion of revenue last year, right? Or recorded 13 billion of revenue last year, and they shipped to they have 136 million subscribers. So in the span of 20 years, what you saw is a market, a consumer, technology all coming together to create a massive change and change what was heretofore an iconic American company. So I only bring that up because this happens every day across every sector. It's more obvious when it's a consumer-oriented sort of business. You see it, it's more visible. But this is the kind of change that's happening and only accelerating, not just in the region, but for companies like ours that many of you support and help. Here's, sort of the way I think a perspective of the world. If you look at the last 100 plus years, on the left, these are all the external things that have happened to companies, right? You dealt with the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression, globalization, the Great Recession, all these things, political market reforms. Parties change, political views change, right? And here we are today with all those same things, but faced with a greater degree of globalization. Automation is becoming increasingly important to survive. As Paul mentioned, trade policy and tariff, right? A brand new thing that's back on the radar, creating huge disruption right now. I understand why it's being done, but I think what you're faced with is corporate America has generally forgot how to deal with inflation. And what's happening is there's massive amounts of inflation flowing through the various supply chains because of that, and then obviously the fight for talent. What you have here is you have to have a real sustainable competitive advantage to compete, survive, and thrive, or else you're going to go away, right? Every day, every week, every year, there's going to be things like this rippling through the world. And if you're a company that isn't nimble, isn't willing to adapt, isn't flexible, you're going to get tripped up by all of these. You're seeing it now. I mean, you're seeing these tariffs have massive adverse impact to a lot of people. And in part because they haven't taken the time to step back, think through what their real competitive advantage is, invest in it, and then also develop supply chain. I walked in the last panel, and I think the first 18 words I heard were supply chain, right? Which is incredibly important. But it's also important to think about it on an export basis, right? As Rexnord, there was no way for us to solely survive serving the United States or North American market. And I think that's true for almost every company in the region. If you look at where the world has grown over time, you have to be there. You have to figure out how to tap into that. And it's also an area that's going to grow for a greater period of time, right? If you look at Europe, if you look at the United States, those are fully developed economies. The populations are not growing. You have to be where the populations are growing. And it's very difficult to do it on your own. And I think the Foxconn example is perfect, right? They have an incredible amount of resources, and they want to address the North American market, but they need help. The same is true for much smaller companies with far fewer resources who have, frankly, even a greater need to continue to survive against global competition. So it's really an interesting way to think about it, which is all these things are going to continue to happen. They probably happen at a greater pace, but helping businesses in the region get out and expand while leveraging the base they have here, I think is the biggest opportunity that I see for the region. This is a word cloud, right? If you Google supply chain, you'll see all these different things. And in the middle of it, what you'd see is flexibility. The reason Foxconn wants to be here is to be close to their customers. They want to collapse lead times. They want to collaborate with people who can bring the best products to market for the customers in this market. If you look at all the other words around it, things like capacity, core competency, trade policy, low cost, lead times, capital expenditure, these are all things that go into the decision. And it is an incredibly complex view. We do business in 75 countries. In the last 10 years, we've consolidated down from probably 10,000 suppliers globally to only 5,000. Why? Because the more you manage a complex supply chain, the more difficult it is, the more costly it is. And so I think where I see the biggest need in the region and where I see the biggest gap in terms of skill set and capability, we talked about developing the supply chain in the region for Foxconn. I think the biggest gap that I see is the talent and capability to help businesses in the region go out and find new markets and new customers. The reality is it's customer and market driven, right? If you think about some of these tariffs and trade policy, it would be wonderful if you could rely on one market and one supply chain to fulfill your customers' needs and have a great business. But I'm not sure that's the reality of the world today. There's a great need to find new markets and new customers. In order to do that, doing it organically, as I said earlier, is just a very difficult thing. So, we rely heavily on a supply chain. We've chosen to be outstanding at a few things and work with partners in many, many others. And find just a few partners, not too many, and help them develop and grow so that they can be part of our business and enjoy the growth too. That being said, we also feel like the region is just a terrific place to run a manufacturing business. We started in 1891 making leather timing belts. Yes, leather timing belts. And over time, the company has grown and diversified into a lot of different industries. We've pared back and really started to focus on process and motion control. So this is the movement of goods through a revenue earning process and water management. And if you look on my left, you'd see we have an aerospace business in Downers Grove. We just commissioned a $40 million new facility, state-of-the-art manufacturing facility, digital, advanced manufacturing, to sort of support what we see as terrific growth. That being said, we can't support Airbus from Downers Grove, right? We've got a sister facility in the UK because of lead times, access to people, engineers communicating real time back and forth. So it's a combination, right? If we want to grow with Airbus, we can't solely do it based in the region. We have to have partners, we have to have people out of the region to be successful, to help the companies in the region grow. The same is true with Zurn. We acquired Zurn 10 years ago, and it was based in Erie, Pennsylvania, which at one point was also a terrific place to manufacture. But over time, the lack of investment, the lack of innovation, the talent receded, and it became very difficult. So we chose to relocate the business to Milwaukee. We've got 150 people that are in Milwaukee now that weren't 10 years ago because of the lack of investment that was done in the region, the lack of talent. And right now, as I said earlier, over a quarter of our workforce is in the region. We don't see that declining any. We see it growing modestly. But what we do see is growth of the business being supported by leveraging external supply chains, both in the United States and all over the world. The earlier panel, they questioned, what would you do differently, or what do you need help with? And, I'll take all the help we can get, right? But I'm not sure that was the intent of the question for me. Supply chain management, everything from understanding what it is to how to leverage it better, how to develop it, how to develop people that understand it, and so that you can focus on your core competencies. I mean, if you think about our business, some of the mechanical devices we were making are made out of steel and forgings. Are we really best suited to be vertically integrated and run a foundry and do all that? Or are we better off leveraging a supply chain that does that? Somebody who can be the best in the world at it, who does have better lead times, better quality, lower cost. A quick story. It was 2004, and I had just been to India. And my dad works at a small civil engineering firm in northern Illinois here. And he's been there for 55 years. And he was grousing about how difficult it was to get new business. Right? He works with an 8-man shop, pretty small. So I went to India, and I said, had the fortunate opportunity to tour the University of Mumbai. And I called him, I said, Dad, you ever think about hiring some engineers, at least interns from the University of Mumbai, so that you could work around the clock? And this little 8-man shop forged a relationship with a university in India and is now able to do engineering around the clock. They've got lead times inside of anybody else. They've grown threefold since 2004, and it was only because he's leveraging a supply chain, right? He's leveraging outside resources that he didn't have before to do something as good or better than he can do. And as a result of that, the business has grown threefold in the region. So that's just a small example. Those examples are multiplied by the thousands if you look at all the companies that are represented in the region. The second thing that I think as a region we need to do is, this is sort of the hotbed of manufacturing for the world, right? Kelly, I don't know what the percentage is, but I was surprised when you told me the amount of manufacturers and business that are in the region relative to anywhere else in the world. And I think that the reality is the world is changing. If you think about that Netflix example or how you buy groceries today, it's going to be different 5 years and 10 years than it is today. Much is true with our products, right? Our products, we were usually selling to an engineer or a maintenance technician. If you put this particular Rexnord product in, it's going to run forever. You're going to eliminate maintenance intervals. It's going to be fine. And in order to buy it, here's a book 6 inches thick, covered in grease, and it's on page 475 in like 2 font. Try doing that today. So what we did is 5 years ago, we launched what we call a digital productivity initiative, which was really twofold, which is to take all the information that we have, whether it's drawings, whether it's lead times, whether it's application engineering, and convert it to digital form. Right before, you had to pick up the phone, talk to somebody. We've converted that to a digital platform that anyone can access 24 hours a day, anywhere in the world. The second thing we did is we took all of our products and we're making them smart. You might have heard the IoT, Internet of Things discussion. I heard that a couple times. And so our products, as an example, and I think many products are, typically the failure mode in an application, right? If a conveyor breaks that is bottling beer, right, or moving grain, the cost of downtime is enormous. But over 127 years, we've figured out that these are the types of conditions, whether it's vibration, whether it's heat, that will cause a failure. So as the cost of technology and cost of sensors has come down, we've embedded sensors into all of our products so our customers can avoid that. The reason we're doing it is because you have to, right? In the next 5 or 10 years, and I'm sure in the Foxconn factory, they're not going to have a guy walking around the conveyors that are moving product all over and touching it to see if it's warm, right? They want to be told it's warm. They want to be told when it's going to fail. And they also want to have a maintenance tech there before it happens, because the reliability and uptime is so important in these continuous operating environments. And so the reality is this is going to happen more and more, right? Everything you need to do in your life or know happens on this. And I think increasingly that's what's going to happen in the industrial world. Consumer world's ahead of the manufacturing world by 10 years, easily. But the curve is coming quick. And so we made the decision to do that. We're seeing just incredible growth because it's saving customers money. And at the end of the day, that's sort of what these private manufacturers are here to do, is how do you make your customers more money? And then finally, I think the prior panel did a terrific job of articulating the need for talent and the need for talent at all ages. The region is got so much to offer, and Wisconsin in particular is sometimes a tough place to attract people. Once they're there, they never want to leave because of the Packers and the Brewers and all that kind of stuff. Is that a sore subject? It's a regional crowd. I'm sorry, but continuing to grow in the region for us, it's going to be limited to a degree by the supply of new talent, right? If you think about the Foxconn discussion this morning, they're going to absorb 300% of the available workforce. Every other company in the region is going to have to figure out how to get the same level of talent, right, at the same time. And so I think early career programs are incredibly important. Get to the high schools, get to the universities. We have 60 to 65 interns every summer, hiring 10 to 12. And, it's incredible what they can do, right? The amount of information that they are able to absorb and use quickly relative to someone my age is just incredible. So you give them real problems and they start solving them right away. So hopefully this was a little bit helpful. I'm far from an expert on regional economic development, but I think just a little bit of a case study on a business that's been in the region for a long period of time and what we are doing and what we see as the big opportunities gives you a little bit of insight if I had one ask, what this region could do could be very similar to what other countries and regions do. If you go to Taiseng, China, it's loaded with German flags. And the reason is a regional economic development group in southern Germany decided to help these German manufacturers get to China. And what happened is they all got there, and they're all thriving and growing as a result of it, because Germany's a relatively small market, whereas China's a huge market. And so if the region could figure out how to create some resources to help companies in region get to other places of the world, it just makes the companies in the regions more stronger and more sustainable over time. Thanks a lot. Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
I was struck with your interesting point that, in your view, the number one priority for our region in economic development is to go more global. That's what I'm hearing. So,
well, it's an opinion.
Sorry?
It's an opinion.
It's an opinion, of course.
Yeah.
One with which I agree, in fact. But I wanted to see what specific advice you would have or recommendations to this audience, which is higher ed, economic development, public sector in the region. How could they better help companies in their region go global? What specific recommendations do you have for them to do a better job there?
It's a tough question. I think it starts with, one, finding companies that have a desire to do that. There's many companies in the region that are thriving and doing perfectly well. So I think you got to find companies that have a desire to grow their business and perhaps expand their markets. Secondly, I think it starts with probably the universities, to be honest. I mean, I think when you look at the resource capability we have from a university's perspective in the region, it's powerful. And so companies are typically busy serving their current markets and their current customers. They have an idea that they need to be someplace, but they're not quite sure. I think leveraging the universities to help them understand where the market opportunities could be, it's a great opportunity for students to get engaged, understand a business and a market and how a supply chain could help this particular customer, and also how to teach them to be a little bit more competitive in that region, right? Price points are different, lead times are different, competitors are different. So leveraging the resources of the universities, working with the companies to find where opportunities could be, would be terrific. And that would be the place that I think would be a logical start.
Mr. Adams and Cindy Tomei from the Illinois Manufacturers Association. If I remember correctly, you just, and I think you mentioned it, an expansion in the Downers Grove area.
That's correct.
What were some of the reasons that swayed the investment to stay in Illinois?
Well, first of all, we've been there for 60 plus years. Aerospace manufacturing requires a degree of skill that's not easily moved. And so, there was competition, but, what weighed the decision for us was the ability to retain the existing workforce and build on it in a location where we've been very successful. We didn't ask for any money from the state. We got a little bit of help from Downers Grove, but we felt it was the right thing to do to stay competitive, right? As part of this factory, we've completely automated most of the processes. We've kept all the same level of employment because we've reserved it for growth. And so for us, it was really about retaining this terrific workforce that we've cultivated and been able to attract over time.
Thank you.
Could you coach us a bit on getting smart about tariffs? I recently had a breakfast with a CEO who said in his 40 years he'd never encountered a tariff cost in his supply chain, and it manifested itself. Larry Kudlow is coming to Chicago on Friday to talk about the president's trade policy. China is going to be discussing, I hope, with the U.S. in the G20 meeting at the end of November, and there's 144 actions that they're supposed to take. They're going to do 80 of them, apparently. They may think about the second tranche. They won't touch the final 20. So how does an American business cope with that changing nature? You did say it's necessary, I think, in earlier remarks, that tariffs are going to be something we have to live with.
Well, I don't know if I don't see these being long-term. I think the basis of it was to sort of create a dynamic where there was a dialogue on potential trade reform. I think that's probably a good thing. The manner in which we're doing it is, sort of open to interpretation. Well, first of all, it's incredibly complex. And I would tell you that, whether it's Section 232 tariffs or Section 301 tariffs, List 1, 2, and 3, it's changing every day. The codes that are subject to tariffs are changing every day. The ability to go lobby exemptions has been, frankly, more accommodating than I would have guessed, meaning that if there is a lack of capacity in the U.S. for a given component or a given commodity, there is some exemptions. But the more interesting thing is the inflation and the cost increases started coming from the domestic supply base faster, right? The things that are being most impacted by tariff, the capacity for most of that, whether it be semiconductor or steel or castings, left the United States a long time ago. And so the amount of capacity that was left couldn't possibly serve the domestic market, couldn't possibly serve it. So you had this instance where the demand went through the roof in the United States because of trying to modify your supply chain to source domestically, but the capacity just couldn't respond. And so what happened was prices went up dramatically. And now what you're seeing is, companies that are having to work, right, to find alternate suppliers, not just in the United States, but elsewhere, route materials differently in the United States, ask for exemptions. But it's to say it's a full-time job is probably an understatement. I mean, we've treated it a bit like a crisis because it is. I mean, as a public company to simply sit there and say, okay, our costs are going to go up 25% tomorrow. Sorry, shareholders, it doesn't work. And I think what you're seeing is, the reaction to that, because as you said, this is sort of unprecedented territory, right? Both the tariffs, the level of the tariffs, and then the amount of inflation that's coming along with it. So be nimble, adapt. It'll probably change. So don't overthink it, right? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why you're not seeing capacity flowing into the United States, right? Because if this changes over time with the result of a negotiation with China, then there'll be too much capacity in the United States for some of these things. So it's really a wait and see, but it's a very difficult period for United States manufacturing companies having to deal with this sort of, uncertainty, right? That's really what I would call it.
One last question? No? Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.